I think, as has been suggested, this is extraordinary. If you're looking at some of the discussions that were taking place on the continent and globally in the last 10 or so years, perhaps 10 years ago, you'd be wondering that perhaps the relationship might change because of pressure from elsewhere. The relationship between China and Africa has been massively historical. Beyond the figures, which is about 250 billion, as you rightly suggest, I would not be surprised if this expands and increases, particularly following the recent visits. But it actually tells you the context of how much China has decided to put its mouth where exactly its fingers are. I want to say at the beginning that, of course, China is contested by the West, who generally have had interest. And I'm not quite sure whether they knew China would come post the Cold War, major Cold War conflicts in the last 20 or so years, the manner in which it has come. China has got a huge advantage. If you look at Ethiopia, ideological links, but particularly in Angola, which is massively impressive. You know, if you see the listings of how President Lourenco received the foreign minister and some of the issues being raised, and look at the infrastructure development of the continent, it's a huge opportunity for Africa. And if I may say so, just very quickly, as I was talking about 10 or so years ago, some of the concerns were very much about whether or not the economic diplomats on the continent genuinely understood the, if you like, the polity of the, if you like, political diplomacy that China had 50, 40 years ago at the peak of the Cold War, because China and Russia were generally the traditional friends, particularly at the time of the liberation struggles in particularly Southern Africa and across Africa. And it's absolutely right that where we are today, as the Cold War settles, although there is new emergence of geopolitics, that China plays its mainstream major role, but in a constructive way with the continent. I look with massive interest how the West in this case is going to respond. But very quickly again, considering the nature of the background of the foreign minister and the manner in which he actually carries himself for China, I think I'm much more excited about him than I have been in recent times.